Hi, so we are live at the Arcadia Bookstore in Spring Green, Wisconsin. And I am here with a couple of my favorite people. And I am going to give them the opportunity to introduce themselves. But first, I'm going to scoot over a little bit so that you can see me. And RL is going to scoot over. So, I'm Jesse Stommel, and I am a professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I am one of the creators of this MOOC, the Shakespeare and Community MOOC, which launched today. And I am here with a trio, but this isn't a trio, it's a quartet. I'm here with a quartet that includes people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and I'm going to let them go around and introduce themselves. If you would like to ask questions of us, we're just going to be having a conversation about Shakespeare. If you'd like to ask questions, feel free to tweet them on the MOOCSpear hashtag. So if you tweet them at hashtag MOOCSPEARE, that would be great. So I'm going to start with the person on my left, my long-term collaborator, who I have taught with for 14 years, 13 and a half years, I think, L Widmann.
Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to see you and so glad you're joining this MOOC. We've just been thrilled to know that there are people from 152 countries participating in this MOOC. That is fantastic. And we're so encouraged because people have started posting already, saying some of them are afraid of Shakespeare and they hope this will help them stop being afraid of Shakespeare. Other people are listing all of the plays they've got memorized, and there's a person in California who's got about 4 plays memorized. Wow. And I think that person's 8 years old, according to what that person said. Wow. So hooray, go California Shakespeare. I've retired from the University of Colorado Boulder from teaching there, and now I spend a lot of time on Shakespeare, reading murder mysteries and worrying about Jesse's sleep patterns.
I'm an insomniac. Now we can all reveal something very unknown about us. That is the curious detail about me.
That'll be useful running the course with 152 countries involved, I suppose. My name is Josh Calhoun, and I teach English literature at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. I teach Shakespeare largely, and I'm just excited to be part of this to be able to contribute in the ways that I can contribute. And it's also been great to see on Twitter and on Facebook people I don't know, but getting to know, and some friends from a few friends I feel I lost touch with. There's suddenly you found the Shakespeare MOOC, and it's been really great to see your contributions. So that's wonderful. And are we really saying something that odd about ourselves? Is this?
Sure, yeah, say something odd about yourself.
I cannot walk upstairs. I seem to only be able to run upstairs. Oh. Whenever I get upstairs, I have an impulse to run. I don't know. That's odd,
there you go. There you go.
Well, I don't know how I can possibly top that. But my name is Melisa Pereyra. I am a regional theater actress, which means basically I travel around the country doing, for the most part, Shakespeare. I have a Master of Fine Arts in Classical Theater, and that's what I've chosen to do with my life. And I'm currently here. I just got into town yesterday to be part of the acting company at American Players Theater. So I'll be doing that again this year. And I don't know that I have an odd thing. I like to crawl up the stairs. No, I don't.
I typically fall down. My name is Melisa Pereyra. I am a regional theater actress. I'm Marty. I am part of the UW Continuing Studies at University of Wisconsin-Madison with Jesse. My background is in theater, production, as a stage manager, and also as an educator. I work in the Madison, Wisconsin theater community, and I'm really happy to be here with everybody today. And I guess my not so secret, odd talent is that I'm an accordion player. So wow. Hello to all fellow accordion players across the globe.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off, and I'm going to ask a question of my illustrious panel, although I want to remind you that I am happy to throw questions at them if you tweet them on #MOOCsphere, if you're just joining us. So my first question for the delightful panel is, why do we need Shakespeare?
We couldn't live without him.
Why do you need vitamins? You know, they're good for you. Can we tell? You know, can we prescribe that for everyone? Probably, but is that? You know, I don't know that it's something that that can be forced upon you, but it's something that you should do because it's good for you, like your vitamins. You know.
Well, I'm in an English department, and I think this speaks to sometimes the fear that, oh, well, we're emphasizing one author too much. And at the same time, I know there have been people in the videos who've referred, well, frankly, referred to Shakespeare as a gateway drug. I know Mike Whitmore has talked about it in better terms as an archway, a way of coming into thinking about, you know, everybody identifies Shakespeare as a writer, and it's a language you can, it pushes you a little bit. And I think it's a way that we can really bring people deeper into the questions that literature asks. And I imagine that Shakespeare, not as the person you read instead of other literature, but somebody you read that pulls you in, and you want to read the next thing and the next thing and the next thing.
I think that sometimes people are scared of Shakespeare because you can feel intimidated by the language, or intimidated by the fact that it's something that you only maybe get to when you're a junior or a senior in high school. And then when you get to college, there are all these people that are living and breathing it and can quote passages, and it can just be a little overwhelming. But when you really have a chance to sit and to experience the language and to take your time, you discover that so many of the stories, in a way, you can relate to in your own life. And you'll relate to them differently at different periods of time in your life. So when you read it, maybe initially when you're 15 or 16 or even 70 or 80 years old, when you come back a year or two later, it's a different story because you're a different person. And I think his plays cover such a huge range of human emotions and human experiences that it's just a great way to get to know yourself and to get to know your fellow humans.
Well, let me just talk briefly with a personal anecdote about my teaching and how plays change. For many years, I taught King Lear, but then my father died, and I was unable to teach that play for 8 years. I just couldn't look at the text, even though it's so thrilling and got so much in it, so much richness. And then I also had a close relative who, at the end of that person's life, slipped into Alzheimer's. And watching that close up in a near relative really made the mad things that King Lear says in the storm scene in the third act so poignant. It looks to me now as if he had Alzheimer's when he's saying those terrible, terrible things in the third act. So apart from the beauty of the language and so on, I think that they're just lines and scenes and characters that just hit us hard, right where our hearts are at various times in our lives. And those times change. They change a lot. When I was really young, I didn't much like Romeo and Juliet. I thought it was a twerpy, really twerpy story. But once I started teaching it, I saw so many students really responded to that play. And they knew it on a deep level, despite their ages. I taught mostly the general population, 18 to 22, when I was teaching both at Penn at the University of Colorado. And those students understood that play very, very well. And here's one last anecdote about me. My parents didn't buy a television until I was 16 years old. So I didn't know how to watch videos, television, and movies. I could read. I was reading from a very early age, but it was a revelation to me to start having to learn how to watch movies. And when my students later would come to me and say, oh, I can't possibly understand Shakespeare, I said, you've got a strength that I don't have. You know how to watch this stuff on film. But I didn't. I had to teach myself that, and their mouths would drop open. Enough about me. Tell me what you think of me.
I think it's great. I love the personal anecdotes. I think we have them all, right? And we feel those. And I think it's also, you know, to identify what you said, you're realizing Lear may have had Alzheimer's, and we say, well, we don't like the way that Shakespeare sometimes portrays certain aspects coming out of the 16th century culture, but there's never necessarily a claim to understand it all, but to portray it. And Shakespeare didn't have the word Alzheimer's. He didn't understand that medical definition. And I have a student who is a pre-med student. He's been looking at medical texts in the 16th century. And in one sense, they're just crazy. What do you, how you treat. At the same time, he made this really great point. He said, but it's still getting at the same question, which I'm interested in, which is when I don't have enough, and I'm going to give a shout out to Ryan Hussey here. These are his words. When I don't have enough empirical data to help someone who's hurting, what do I do? And, that was true in the 16th century. It's true now. And we can look back and say, oh, maybe there was Alzheimer's. But it's still it's something that is a poignant issue, whatever you call it.
I also think that Shakespeare, more than any other playwright, demands your attention in a way that no one else has, at least for me, that when you go see a Shakespeare play, it's not even about having deep thoughts or deep feelings, but it's because he wrote to an audience that was just that, an audience, an auditory group of people that went mainly to listen to these plays. And how now we, as we're all learning how to watch something or how to experience something, now we have to retrain ourselves to listen better, because that's a skill that we can always get better at. But in Shakespeare's plays, if you're a good listener, you're good to go. There's not much more than that. And he repeats things, as I'm sure you know, 3 to 4 times. And that's why a lot of people start thinking, oh, we know that. Yes, that character already talked about that. But he does that because the audience of his time were there to listen. And if you don't hear it more than once, you may miss it. And he didn't want you to do that. So he does a lot of the work for us as well, which is nice.
Sorry, I'm just checking, making sure everyone can actually see us. Someone was having trouble seeing us earlier, but I think now we're just from that camera.
Okay.
I have it set so we're just on that camera, and the audio is coming from this camera, interestingly enough. We're in a bookstore, and there is action all around us, and we've got some Shakespeare books among us. And I thought I would just turn us to Romeo and Juliet. And we can get back to talking about Shakespeare, and I see that there's a couple questions coming in. But I want us to look for a moment at the second balcony scene in Romeo and Juliet. And so I have 2 volunteers, two novice volunteers, AKA I volunteered them, to give us a short reading of the second balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet. So we're starting, if you want to follow along, we're starting in Act 3, Scene 5, Line 1, with the line from Juliet, "Wilt thou be gone?" And so why don't we have them take it away?
And if you're using a digital text, this is probably the only mention of a pomegranate in the play. Right? So if you search pomegranate, this should get you to the lines.
It's good to know.
Pomegranates don't appear a whole lot in Shakespeare because they're the symbol of Catherine, Henry VIII's wife, that had to be got rid of, and all pomegranates as well. And so years later, Shakespeare's not big on pomegranates. Little known fact.
So I'm reading Juliet. Is this true?
Yes. Josh is Juliet.
Joshua Calhoun.
Yes, the non-professional actor will read. We have a professional actor reading Romeo. Okay. Wilt thou be gone? It is not yet near day. It was the nightingale, not the lark, that pierced the fearful hollow of thine ear. Nightly she sings on yon pomegranate tree. Believe me, love, it was the nightingale.
It was the lark, herald of the morn, no nightingale. Look, love, what envious streaks delace the severing clouds in yonder east. Night scandals are burnt out, and jocund day stands tiptoe on the misty mountain tops. I must be gone and live, or stay and die.
Yon light is not daylight, I know it high. It is some meteor that the sun exhaled to be to thee this night a torchbearer and light thee on thy way to Mantua. Therefore stay yet, thou needst not to be gone.
Let me be ta'en. Let me be put to death, I am content, so thou wilt have it so. I'll say yon grey is not the morning's eye, 'tis but the pale reflex of Cynthia's brow. Nor that is not the lark, whose notes do beat the vaulty heavens so high above our heads. Have more care to stay than will to go. Come, death, and welcome, Juliet, wilt it so? How is't, my soul? Let's talk, it is not day.
It is. High hence be gone away. It is the lark that sings so out of tune, straining harsh discords and unpleasing sharps. Some say the lark makes sweet division. This doth not so, for she divideth us. And it gets hairy there for a few lines. We were talking earlier. This is where they cut. So we decided we'll cut here.
Okay, good.
How about those last two lines, though, the couplet, where Juliet says, "Oh, now be gone."
Okay, yes. Oh, now be gone. More light and light grows.
More light and light, more dark and dark our woes.
Da-dum, da-dum, da-dum. Tragic music in the background.
Foreshadowing.
Yep. What glorious poetry. These are just magnificent lines that Shakespeare's written for us here. So beautiful, so beautiful.
I love that, I haven't said these lines out loud. I don't think ever. I've only heard them. But the line when it says, night's candles are burnt out on jocund day, and then the language changes and it goes, stands tiptoe on the misty mountain tops. You have all these T's that are so fun, and the image that he's painting of the sky and the morning is just, it's so beautiful and so playful, and yet so sad, and it's doomsday is coming, and that's what they're talking about in such a beautiful way, which I think is what makes it so vivid.
I love that it starts with those lines, wilt thou be gone. It's the sort of the turn from this very kind of almost dreary first four words, wilt thou be gone. And what a word that word is, gone. I'm really fascinated, and we talked about this, and we've got a little of you on camera talking about this, and actually me on camera talking about this, but about this sort of the feel of the words in your mouth. And a word like gone, and what that does to your voice, that it actually leaves a kind of hollow in the back of your throat. It leaves a space, it leaves an emptiness inside of your mouth as you say it. You actually have to move your tongue, gone. You have to move your tongue out of the way to sort of create that hollow. And the way that so much of this play does that, forces you to do with your body and do with your mouth and do with your face the things that are happening for these characters. You talk about, in the videos, we have you talking about the word greed, and we also have you talking about the word fire. And both of those words, I mean, literally, they produce on your face the emotion that you're meant to feel when you say the word. And for Shakespeare to be thinking about this, thinking about the way that words actually produce emotions on our faces, which then if you smile, if I smile, I actually suddenly felt a little, I felt a little happy. And so there's a way in which saying the word actually causes you to feel an emotion.
I don't know if this is something we can post or people can get their hands on, but Mary Oliver, who was once poet laureate and just a beautiful, wonderful living poet, has a handbook of poetry. It's short, it doesn't cost very much, and she has a section on sounds, and she ends that section by then reading a poem that so many people know, Robert Frost Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and that she talks so much about these sounds and how they work, and these N's that we can hold out, but the T's that we can't, we'd have to say T, 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 you can't hold it out, and how that changes the effect. It's really, it's the most readable thing on the sounds of poetry that I can recommend. I often recommend to students, and she's just such a. She reads "Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening," but it's actually a book by Mary Oliver. And we'll, I guess you're finding it now, but it's something that I always share with students and always find really productive. Also because people like that poem, so then you can see she tells you how these sounds work, and then shows you in something that you thought you knew, and she shows you what you didn't know, and why that helps.
Let me ask the other panelists here why you think the particular birds, lark and nightingale, are in this passage, as opposed to the cuckoo or the phoenix or Something else. Lark, nightingale.
Wow. No, I'm not going to go there.
I'll just say
I'm
something
not
really
gonna go there.
briefly, because I haven't really thought about this before, but I'm going to say something really briefly, and just to bring back the idea of the sound of the words. There are two words that sound almost completely differently. One is 3 syllables. The other is a single syllable. One has really rough letters like lark. And the other, nightingale. It rolls off of your tongue. So just the words themselves have a very different character. And so these are different birds. To mistake them for one another is fascinating.
When you've
Does-
performed this too.
And I'm just asking because I don't actually know. Is it also that the nightingale sings in the evening, which is the part where they're safe and it's gentle and it's night, and the lark is part of daylight, so it's abrupt and sharp and bright?
Yes, but the nightingale is not only gentle. Romeo and Juliet are now married, and they've been having a wonderful time getting to know each other physically this last night. And the nightingale is a symbol for their married love. Or unmarried love in the cases of those people who are not married to each other in the romances out of which this sort of story comes. But the nightingale is very clearly a symbol here too for the sexual activity they've engaged in. And most high school teachers are not able to bring that meaning out for their students. So students reading this in high school are likely to think that these two lovers have been holding hands all night and nothing more.
And they're actually ornithologists who are really fascinated with birds.
But this
The
must be
science
so fun to
class.
perform, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
the playfulness here, and then that moment that you switch and say, when you've played Juliet, no, it's the lark. Get out of here. Something's gonna happen to you.
Well, I think it's you know, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but that it's just denial. It's these kids that have just become, you know, she's just become a woman, as you said, and fighting against that and actually trying to stop time, actually trying to stop the sun from rising and seeing it and saying, no, that's not it. And she goes into her imagination, right? No, it is some, and if you listen to that too, it is some meteor, right? It's like, where does that come from? She grabbed the sound of one word and carried it onto the next, as if she's making it up then, right?
Yeah.
It's some meteor that the sun exhales, and then the sentence keeps going and building on itself. But that they're helplessly and just trying to make time stop, and finally the reality of the moment hits, and it says, you know, it's no, I'm sorry I've been a girl. I know I'm a woman, and we gotta go. You gotta go. And and there is, you know, the playfulness of the scene, I think, is so beautiful and the whole play is so in this way, but it's beautiful for such a short moment, and it's pure for such a short moment. And what they are doing, at least how I felt in the play when I got to play Juliet, was just grasping and trying to hold time back, or to make it stop, or it's just, you know, this whole or to make it go faster, right? And as we all do in all of our lives, but in this scene in particular, I think the realization for this girl who's now a woman that there's nothing that she can do to make time stop.
Yeah.
So what's the practical thing to do? It is day, and you have to go. And I think that detachment, it is. She has to say it twice just to make sure, right? Because you never know what happens in between that punctuation, right? Between the it is and there's another punctuation, then it is again. You gotta go.
And then the repetition happens again at the end. More light and light, more dark and dark are woes. And there's a sense in which they can almost stop time inside the syllables. And I wonder if there's a way in which poetry has the ability to do that. I mean, if we think about how much gets compressed inside of a single word, how much gets compressed inside of 2 syllables or 1 line of poetry, how much information, how much feeling. I think about someone like Emily Dickinson and how much she was able to contain inside of 1 poem. And if there's a way in which we can stop time because words stop time, because we get lost inside of them and they can contain so much. I think I said in this course somewhere that a word is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. And there's almost something we can go inside. And that keeps repeating that idea of hollows right at the beginning. That pierced, the fearful hollow of thine ear. So we have a question. I actually have a couple questions. One is for you, Melisa, and it is, how do you convince us you are really a young teen, which the characters are? I've seen bad productions fail at this and ruin the play.
Oh my! She didn't ruin the play. I saw her performance. She was lovely.
You know, from day one of the things that we were directed to do was to not play age, right? It's not, I don't think it's something I can show you or that I can necessarily play, but if I'm listening to these words, like you were saying, like Jesse was saying, they do something to you. And there is a newness, and regardless of how many times I've said, "Wherefore art thou, Romeo?" there's a newness that never goes away. And I think it's constant anticipation, and as the words are coming out, they always somehow seem new. And I think for me in particular, I have training, so that's how I did that. But I also think if you pick up the play and say the words out loud, there is no way that you won't feel that age and that young, because the words are that way. They're new and they're young. And so what we are asked to do as actors is go to the words. So if I am open enough, and there's a lot of fear that you have to get past to just say the words, because a lot of the time you want to act them and they're, oh, but I feel so much. And for me in particular, I'm a very passionate person, and there are times when Juliet is not that way in the beginning, and where she is this reserved girl, and her feelings are not. She doesn't wear her heart on her sleeve. But then she meets Romeo and things start to change. But again, it's not something I don't think that I can play. Just, I've seen, King Lears that are, oh, there's an old man. And you're like, well, okay, but how long can you watch somebody be old? How long can you watch somebody be young? That's not exciting to watch. What's exciting to watch is a human being living their lives at whichever point in the journey the playwright put you in. And for this one, he put me at 14, But
Brenda DeVita says in our video for this week, she says that that these are adults in children's bodies. How does that resonate with you? And then I'll see how that resonates with other people. So is there a sense in which Juliet isn't, and one of the other tropes that keeps coming up is this idea that this is Juliet's play, that in a sense, she is the center of this narrative. And I've said before that I sort of see Juliet as being the character that Shakespeare is identifying with, although I don't necessarily know that for sure, but the character whose story is being centered. So is there a sense in which she's actually an adult inside of a child's body?
Oh my gosh, when she goes to talk to the friar and says, tell me not, friar, that thou hearest of this, that you heard that I'm going to go marry Paris, unless you're going to tell me how you might prevent it. How are you going to stop it? Okay, you don't have okay, I'm going to kill myself. Like there is that, I think it's a very, that is a child trapped, an adult trapped into a child's body, because it's trying to do this what she thinks is a very mature reaction to what is happening to her. But being the age that she is, what she comes up with is, I'm going to put a knife to my throat, or I'm going to, I think that the character inside is just constantly going like this against herself. And there's a lot of, when they're going to meet, when they're in the balcony scene, we're going to go, we're going to meet, the friar is going to be at this time, and you're going to be there. Okay, great. See you there. So that's an adult trapped into it. That's very mature, I think, for a kid. I mean, especially, not a kid, but a teenager. And especially when you have that in contrast with Romeo and the words that he gets to say, and kind of how he seems to be sure, I'll go do that. Oh yeah, I'll go do that. And so that she is absolutely that driving force that you're talking about, that the planner. But I think at some point, because she's not as old as she thinks she is, which I think happens. I know I was that teenager. It kind of catches up to her, and that's when it all unravels, you know. But I don't know if I've answered that question. Yeah, but yeah.
Other thoughts?
Well, I'll bring in some historical aspects here, which really change in some ways my perception of Juliet. Years ago at the Folger Shakespeare Library, a scholar and historian who was actually doing research on marriage ages of people had gone to Florence and looked in the archives, and he found that many, many, many of the marriages were of 12 and 13-year-old people who were girls, women, and that that was normal rather than unusual in Florence at the time. And if we extrapolate that to England, it very well could have been normal there too. Another aspect is I've lived in England off and on for quite a bit of time, and I was somewhere, and I no longer remember where I was looking at gravestones, one of my favorite occupations. And I looked at this gravestone, and it was Lady so-and-so who had died at the age of 28, and she had already had 14 children.
Wow.
Wow. And that, wasn't unusual. I went around and looked for other gravestones. Lots of the women had died, of course, young because of having had too many children or whatever. And obviously the children die young too. So it's one thing to say Juliet's a girl. In contemporary terms, that's certainly true. And we think of her as a young teen. And when we think about how people at that age today behave in American and Western culture, but in Shakespeare's time, she was ready to be married. Even though the ends of her bones weren't formed, she was still going to get married off.
And you can tell this through the play because
her father.
Well, not even then, but earlier in the play when Mom says, you're going to marry Paris, you're going to, I'll look to like, if looking like a move, sure. Absolutely. It is absolutely not unusual. But what is unusual is the violence that is inserted in this play. What is unusual, so at some point that you can tell an audience the fact that that this isn't unusual by the way that Juliet reacts when she gets told, hey, you're going to marry Paris. And I think those are small ways in which you can not misinterpret, but I guess interpret differently, right? I don't know that we misinterpret, but the play as a whole, if you have a Juliet that from the beginning, and you can do that, right? Shakespeare gives us the freedom to play that if that's what we want to do as actors. So that we can go to the play and say, you're going to marry Paris. What? So from the beginning, she cannot like the idea. My Juliet was not that way. Why? Because if I looked at my parents, Tracy Michelle Arnold, who's a fabulous actress here, played my mother, and Jim Ridge played my father, and you can Google these names if you'd like. They're amazing, amazing actors. And if I looked at them playing these characters, their daughter would not misbehave, not at the very beginning of the play. It's just not the girl that these people have created together. It didn't seem right. And if I chose to rebel so early in the play too, what else? Where are we going with this? So it's about like leaving little kernels, I think, for the audience along the way that they can. She's, so to give them something to pick up instead of showing them, the entire entree.
So I have a question for you. I'm going to turn this over to you, Josh, and see what you think about this. Is it important for us to add the time that this particular play was written to this discussion? Like, does that matter? Is there a different Shakespeare when this play was written that shed some light on this?
The question of importance, it's a good question people want to ask. Like, do I need to do this? You don't need to. But you can add a lot of layers to your understanding of the play, as with anything else, by learning more of the details around it. But to identify with, this is anachronistic in its own way. I see this question of Juliet as a woman. I'm not sure if the final scene happens a different way that Romeo can kill himself with a dagger. I don't know if I believe, at least in some of the productions I've seen, that Romeo has that Romeo's matured to the point where Juliet has. I mean, he drinks poison, he gets off easy. She does sort of a Roman death. I feel it's even anachronistic. There's a kind of a Roman death there of like Brutus. You know, she kills herself in a way that's horrific. And I see that, like that maturity there, that power. I don't. That's a, you know, most people. It's a gruesome topic to talk about. Most people would not choose that way if they were going to shuffle off their mortal coil. And you know, so I see that. But the other thing is the identification. Look, you can go back and say those lines we read earlier. You can say, okay, well, what is this? This is a type of literature, and it is. It's a type of poem, and it's called it's often written in the first person, a lyric poem called an aubade, A-U-B-A-D-E, and it's a poem about not wanting it to be morning yet when you're in bed with your lover. And it's there's a great poem by one of the perfect examples of is John Donne from this period, The Sun Rising. But it's, you don't need to read John Donne. You don't need to know that term, aubade. I mean, anyone, you don't even need to have spent,
To share
you know,
that
it doesn't have to be a
feeling.
lover in bed. It can be
Yeah.
someone you love. I mean, just think of the last time you said goodbye to someone you love, you know? And you just, you were thinking about time. If you could have just grabbed time and held it, you know? If you could have just stopped it, if you could have shut it off for a second. You didn't want to go. You didn't want to go through airport security. You just, right? I mean, you pushed it till the last moment, and that you don't need the historical context for that, but I do think the historical context enriches that.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering about specifically the historical context of when this particular play was written. So I'm just pulling up the date, 1597, and thinking about whether or not there's a different Shakespeare writing this play in 1597 than the Shakespeare that wrote Titus Andronicus in 1593, or the Shakespeare who wrote The Tempest in 1611. Is this a middle of your career play? Is there something about this play?
Well, when I was teaching this stuff, I dated at 1595, along with Richard II.
It's a lot, Richard II.
And Midsummer Night's Dream. And as I've been reading Shakespeare for many, many years, I've told my students that as you keep reading Shakespeare, you can see two periods where he made major jumps as an artist. One is in 1595 with these three plays, Dream, Romeo and Juliet, and Richard II, all of which have such glorious, glorious poetry in them. And then again about 1601 when he writes Hamlet and Twelfth Night. And there are intellectual growths that go on in both of those time periods, those seasons of the theater. And it's just thrilling to watch an artist move like that. A grim example of it is to take us into art. Rothko went crazy at the end of his life, and you can literally see his madness in his paintings when he starts painting black streaks across the middle, and they're such angry paintings. And this is an artist who cut off his arms to kill himself. You know, that's a little more bold, I guess we would say, than a dagger in the chest that Juliet does. But you see these jumps in artistic work. And so for me, Romeo and Juliet and Midsummer Night's Dream are so much fun to work with together, because when we're looking at Midsummer Night's Dream, especially the fifth act, we have to say, well, now, is this Shakespeare parodying what's going on in Romeo and Juliet, the play that we've just been looking at in a different context, and so on. So fie on 1597.
So I have a follow-up question that actually came from Twitter, and it's connected to this. And so I've been kind of bridging to this question. I saw it coming a while ago, so I've been like, let's inch our way over to that question. So the question is how to get beneath the layers of cultural references and received wisdom and image to really get into a play like Romeo and Juliet. So this is Twitter, so this is condensed. But the question that I see here is, how do we let go of some of those things that we know or things that we don't know, so that we can actually just get inside of the play? Is it even possible? Are there things we actually have to know, or maybe things we have to not know in order to really get inside this play?
Yeah.
I think and it's different for each of us, but I think for me, the turning point in my relationship with Shakespeare was the first time that I actually had a chance to see a live production. So I didn't have the words in front of me, and I'm one of those people that grew up reading encyclopedias and carrying around my little Merriam-Webster dictionary. So when I read Shakespeare in high school, I had to look everything up. I wanted to know what every word meant, and I had footnotes upon footnotes, and I had index cards. And for me, it opened up when I actually put it down and heard somebody else speak the language. So I was able to let go of having to be so meticulous, and that's when the emotional side of the story sort of hit me. And then when I went back to the text, it was easier. It was more alive. It was less of an academic study and more of an exploration. That's just my experience, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to something I think then feeds right into the APT, because I did a pre-show talk a couple years back when APT was doing Hamlet. You know, reading Hamlet, I think the play is layered. I think this was a great question. I think the plays are actually layered in such a way verbally that you can't take it all in one sitting. And we were talking about this before. There's the repetition. That's why people cut things out, right? And you think, oh, that you've already said this, but so I think, you know, there's often this debate between is this for the stage or the page, and I think yes, it's kind of both, because you know, one thing that I really encourage we went to the theater, and the group said, well, we're excited about it, but we're a little nervous. I'm not sure you're going to get it. You will get it. The actors will get it for you. You know, and the APT did a brilliant job of doing that. And what you have to do is let go of the lines you missed. Like, just let it go, and then use the page after. And then when you come back to the page after you've seen it, and I really encourage students, if they can't see a production, to watch a film version of it. And I think at that, you know, so really just understanding the action first, and not as necessarily a summary, but as understanding it in terms of personal interactions, which is very different, right? And you know about this, and then the word level, and then some of the cultural level. And I think it's an archaeology, but it starts at that level of like just seeing how passionate and beautiful it is, which actors like you do for us.
But I think, you know, it's very, I think I've seen a lot of bad Shakespeare. The ratio of bad Shakespeare I've seen is very large compared to the ratio of good Shakespeare I've seen. And I think that's why I've chosen to do this, because I wanted to always be good. And in order, I want people to walk out of there and say, yeah, I understood I got the play. And I think so if you don't understand the play when you go see one, it may not be you. So that's another responsibility too, that as an audience member, you can wash your hands off, because if you didn't get it, that's fine. It's fine. And you'll see another one, and you'll wonder, you'll start to think, well, why did I get what that person was saying, but not what that other person was saying? That's our job, to engage you and bring you into that world. And I think, and a lot of, I like to pay attention to the poetry, and some people don't. And that's another right that we all have as actors as well, that there are different things that attract people to Shakespeare. And for me, I don't know why it wouldn't be the poetry, but maybe somebody else is interested in something else, and you as an artist have to give the freedom to them, as well as when people come see it, you have the freedom to choose. I mean, to just watch and wash your hands of what you didn't understand, and know that when you see another play, those words will live in your body somewhere because you heard them. And if you heard them again, and if you hear them differently, that those layers and that cultural awareness, even of being in the theater, in this communal space with all these people from all walks of life, will give you a different perspective the next time you go, I think.
I love you also sort of saying, like, if you go on a bad date, it's not that you don't want to be dating. It's just you don't want to date that person.
There are lots of plays in the sea, you know?
Well, and also lots of performances in any individual production. So if one character doesn't resonate with you, Mercutio is a character that is either the most important character in the play for me, or one that I sort of want not to be there. And it all depends on how they use that character. And I'll watch one production and I'll be, this is Romeo and Juliet. I'll watch another one, and it's Mercutio is the character that has me drawn in. And this also makes me think about the MOOC as a thing, and about how much stuff there is in this course, and about the fact that just like a Shakespeare play, there's so much that you could never follow it all. 16, 17,000 people now inside of our discussion forums. I'll never be able to, I'm spending every night, all night doing this, but I'll never be able to read everything that's there. The same way I'll never in my life, I might be able to pass my eyes over every word that Shakespeare has written. That's possible. Will I actually be able to read and absorb and interpret every single play and every single line? Or will I be able to find new things constantly for the rest of my life?
New things. One thing we have not talked about, and this is a really important aspect of theater for me, and that's the costumes. And here's an anecdote, and it's related directly to Romeo and Juliet. My first teaching job was at Penn in Philadelphia, and the film of Romeo and Juliet, the Zeffirelli, came out. So I go to a matinee thinking, oh, this is going to be wonderful. You know, nobody will bug me in this show. So, of course, two elderly people sit down behind me, and one says to the other, what's this about? And the fight scene was going on at the beginning of the play, and it's very clear as to who's Capulets and who's Montagues, given the way they're dressed there. And one says to the other, well, that's Montagues and that's Capulets, and they don't like each other. And that was what they thought they were going to see for the rest of the movie. I thought it was just enchanting. Costumes told them.
If you get one thing, that's an important thing, right?
Yep. And it's so much more than that film too. But I just love watching what the costumers do in every production I go to. I was really lucky because I got to see the Comedy of Errors in England at Stratford-upon-Avon when they did the dominoes for the twins and so on. It was beautiful, beautiful costuming, and that just lives in my memory. So costumes matter too.
I think all design aspects of a production are incredible imperative to successful storytelling. And actors are a very, very small part. We're the ones that get all the glory afterwards. Everybody claps for you and it's wonderful. But there's 8 to 10 people working backstage for every actor that's on stage. So you have to really remember that it takes a community and teamwork to make these plays come to life. And that, yes, the costume design is incredibly important. You can tell the clearer story, or if everybody's wearing different colors, you don't know what to look at. And if that's what they're trying to do, then they've accomplished it, right? Because maybe they are trying to create chaos. Maybe they don't want you to know right away who is who and what's going on. So the visual aspect of the theater, which is costuming, it's lighting, it's sound design, it's staging itself. If you have an actor that you see most of their backs all the time, it will become intrusive to. All you will notice is that actor's back the entire play and say, well, what is their face doing? And that's where a director really comes to play to make sure that the vision of the whole, of everything, of the acting, moment to moment acting, to that the sound sounds right, that the lighting is the right mood, especially, in the scene that we just read for you, that it's not suddenly it's the shining sun and it's just like blinding, that it is just morning, and so the design can be a very good thing for a play or a very bad thing for a play. And that's why it's important for people to work together and to have discussions like this, and to say, well, will the audience be confused by this? Do we think that, and those are conversations that we as actors are not really a part of. That we come in and the costumes are designed, and so is the lighting and the set, and you just come in and try to rise up, to all the work that these people have been working on for months, if not years.
So that connects to my next question. I'm going to start with Sarah for an answer to this one. But my question is, what is the role of the audience and what is the role of a student in this MOOC? What is the role of the reader? As we started this, the camera was set on the wrong camera. So it was facing RL and I while you were all talking. But the only reason it could have been like that in the entire time.
Right.
But I was paying attention to the back channel and someone said something and I clicked a button and hopefully now it's been right for the rest of the time. And the thing is that we often don't do that. We often forget that there's an audience, that there are people listening. And so being able to make a connection with those people and make subtle changes. And so I guess my question, I'll start with Sarah and then other people can jump in. What's the role of the reader and the student and the audience?
Are people listening to this?
Oh, yes.
Thousands?
17,000.
Hope so. Go,
That's a lot. That's a lot. So I think of the MOOC much like I think about working in theater. Things are not complete until there is an audience. And really, the word audience seems to put a wall up there. It's more about being a participant. When I work on a stage production, regardless of what the play is or the musical or the musical piece that we're presenting, it's incomplete until you're sharing it. You do all this work, you work for weeks and weeks and weeks, months and months, years and years, but until you share that emotion and that joy and that experience with a larger community, it's not real. It doesn't matter. It's selfish to hold it to yourself, and it's not complete until other people are involved. And I feel, even though this is, official day one of our experiment and exploration of Shakespeare, it's much the same. All the work that we did is incomplete until everybody at home or at work, around the train, or wherever they are with their device, checks in and shares their experience and raises questions and creates a conversation that we're all part of together. So I think it's very similar in that respect.
What she said.
I wanted to say, reading is, Shakespeare, we think of, how does he live, as he talks about at the end of Sonnet 18. So long lives this, and this gives life to thee. What is this? And there's been a conversation happening on Facebook about, what does your book look like? What are you reading for Shakespeare? This is whatever you're holding in your hand. It could be your iPad, it could be your book. It's this, and it's actually, there are 4 sonnets that do the same thing. They don't say this book, these papers. They just say this. Whatever you're holding in your hand is this. It's Shakespeare, and the interaction with it. And Shakespeare was an amazing reader, and he takes these stories and he reinvents them and he reimagines. Romeo and Juliet is not a new story.
It's not a new story that no one has told before.
No, and it's not. It gets told over and over. And it's funny. We were sitting we're looking at the kids section, which is great. I love kids books. But there's a Romeo and Juliet board book behind you, Jesse. I can't imagine what you'd read to a 5-year-old about Romeo and Juliet, but it's right, this red one, right? But then over here, there's a brick Shakespeare, and there's all these sort of Shakespeares. But I'm looking straight ahead at this book by my daughter's 9 years old. Our favorite author is Kate DiCamillo, The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane. And I think that's more Shakespearean than anything I see. I think it's more Shakespearean than this book because she's got some stories in there. She's retelling stories, and her ability to tell stories is Shakespearean in its own way. It's gathering up a story and thinking it through in another way. And she talks about that particular book because she had this vision of a rabbit, a China rabbit, laying on the bottom of the ocean floor. And then eventually it became that book, which is it's a gorgeous book. I highly recommend it. But it's also, I can imagine Shakespeare thinking, what, I have this character, I read this story and I see this character now. What do I do with that? And just waiting until it comes. And in Midsummer Night's Dream and Romeo and Juliet, we really get sort of 3 versions of the same story, with Pyramus and Thisbe being one other version. And he sort of just keeps reworking that story in an interesting way. So reading and interacting with the story, I think it's just wonderful. And I hope some people will try to make some stories of their own and post those. Make some movies, make little films. Send us your version. And it doesn't have to be like Romeo and Juliet as a film, but how would that look for you?
Well, and secretly, that's going to be an assignment in the MOOC. Giving away. Yeah, look at you giving
at you
everything
giving
away.
everything
I'm so excited.
But hold on
Did you
one
get the memo,
second, because I
Josh?
want to check and see, make sure our audio is still in sync.
With Pyramus and Thisbe being one other person. And he sort of just keeps reworking that story in an interesting way.
It's actually
so
not.
reading. I mean, reading and interacting with the story.
So I'm going to do something really quick that will put it back in sync, I think.
Okay.
Is it my?
Slight intermission.
Is it because we're not using my audio?
Okay, I think that we should now be in sync, but hold on one second and I'm going to check and make sure that that worked. Then I'm going to ask just a couple more questions, but I do want to read the board book now.
I could too. I'm fascinated. There's also the Brick Shakespeare tragedies over there.
I'm going to do something really quick and put it back. Okay.
Are we live right now? Just like comment?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we're still live.
Well, we're
Okay.
live.
I think that. Okay.
Should we be speaking?
Yeah, I think we're a little bit better in sync, but there might be a slight delay.
Well, I wanted to make a quick comment on what Josh was talking about with Shakespeare holding in his hand, and that was this. But you don't have to have the paper in your hand if you've got it memorized, and then this is this.
Yes.
And the mind itself is so important in Shakespeare, and that ability to process the story, process the source, change Brooks' long play of Romeo and Juliet, which takes place over 9 months, and condense it into this play that he gives us, where it starts on Sunday and it's all over by Thursday. As we read the play or watch the play, we don't get that sense that it's so fast unless we say to ourselves, how much time is really passing here? And we get a similar playing with time in Midsummer Night's Dream, where we're supposed to start out with 4 nights until they get married. But apparently these nutcases are running around in the woods for 1 night. So who knows what time is? Who knows what this is? Yeah, he's a genius.
So we're gonna give. I'm gonna check the sound just to make sure that that actually worked, and then we're gonna ask you. Yes.
Working.
Yes, it is totally working. So a couple more last comments.
Well, I wanted to say something about how impactful audiences are. Back to your question, that audiences are what make these plays new as a performer, and I think as a teacher too. I mean, when I teach Shakespeare, I am reminded of all the things I've learned before, but because I am telling it again to a different group of people, it becomes new and it becomes alive in a way that if I was telling it in my head to myself, it's just not as exciting. But I think, especially, in all plays, but in comedies, sometimes as we're getting to Tech Week and we're rehearsing 12-hour days and everyone is exhausted, and we all know that all we need as performers is just the audience. Can we add our next character to the play? Because if they can only not be there for so long until we miss them, and that's why you have a rehearsal period, and then it's time for them to come in and for you guys to be there because you make it new, and no audience is the same. I performed Romeo and Juliet the first time I played Juliet a few years ago somewhere in Arizona. I can't remember the exact city, but we were touring this production and we were performing it for middle schools, and some of them had never, it was elementary school, and they had never read it yet. They hadn't read it, they hadn't seen it, they didn't know how it was going to end or what the play really was about, except just a brief synopsis. And as Juliet is taking the potion, she's about the sleeping potion, I hear this whisper from the first row, this tiny little girl, and she goes, "Don't do it, Juliet." And she made the play. She made the play for me. me.
Mhm.
And she could, if I think sometimes as audiences, myself included, we tend to, because when we watch a movie, we feel like we should be reserved and quiet and pay attention, and that's not what we're asking audiences to do either.
Mhm.
Just like we're not asking students to just read the books and come to class. It's more about participating and realizing what it means to you. And some audiences will laugh at the most inappropriate moments, and you have 1,200 people laughing at the same thing that they never laughed before. And we've been there as performers the night before, and we're like, what did we do different?
What did we do differently?
Nothing, nothing, you know, we didn't do anything. It's just them guiding us and showing us the play that they're seeing, or the story that you read, and I think, or what you got out of lecture that day. And I think that's what makes this kind of work worth doing, I think.
Other last words before we wrap up.
Parting in such sweet sorrow.
Actually, that will connect to the final thing, which I'm going to do. And I'm just going to come over to the camera and show off the board book because it's covered. If I can make it.
Don't trip. Don't fall down the stairs.
So this is Romeo and Juliet, art by Allison Oliver, and it's a counting primer by Jennifer Adams. And I'm just going to show a couple pages here, but count one balcony. Although there are two balcony scenes, but there is only one balcony. Two loves. Look, it's Romeo and Juliet. Technically, there are actually many more loves in this play, but there are two. And I'm going to skip a little bit. Ooh, there's 7 masks, but I mostly wanted to skip to the end. 8 love letters. But here we go. 9 streets and bridges. And 10 kisses. Parting is such sweet sorrow. So on that note, I'm going to say goodbye, and I hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye.